and training and advocacy, that we aren't we are dissimilar from South Dakota Advocacy Services in that we don't get funds to work with people and develop case files and etc. So the work that we do with individuals, what I try to explain to people is we try to get them connected to the best resource for what they're needing right now. Oftentimes we'll get a call and they're saying, well, for instance, a parent of a 3-year-old, well, I've heard about Voc Rehab and I've heard about independent living and I've heard about whatever, and we'll say, well, put Voc Rehab to the side right now. That's not where you want to put your effort right now. Right now you might want to look at South Dakota Parent Connection and some of those entities that can be more useful. So that's the role we kind of play with people, as well as letting them know if they have an issue and they want to bring it forward, where they can do that and how they can best do that. And then we're also a central networking point for organizations that serve people with disabilities and others. The last several years now we've been working with what's known as the Disability Advocacy Network in the state, and that is a group of organizations that meet regularly, not only in regards to our legislative session on the state level, but also in terms of national issues. And we hold a disability policy summit every year, and it's really evolved into a very effective way to make sure that most of us, because I won't say all of us, are on the same page in terms of what's going on, what information is out there. But we also recognize that we don't always agree on things, so if we decide to take a position on something, the way in which we do it is we write a position paper, write a letter to our congressional delegation, we put it out to all the network members, asking them if they feel comfortable signing off on that. If they don't, that's fine. If they do, that's fine. But just recognizing there's some issues that impact all of us equally and we can get together on. There are others that are more specific, and maybe there's a reason that we don't all want to be involved with that issue. So that's been a real successful tool, and I can honestly say has become quite recognized within the state and also with our congressional delegation members. So we're happy about that in terms of voicing the need for policies that really are beneficial to persons with disabilities. So that's a little bit about the coalition, but that's not why you're here. So we'll talk more about who are South Dakotans with disabilities. And as you'll see, the number of non-institutionalized South Dakotans of all ages is estimated to be 796,500. And of that, 11.8% are reported as having one or more disabilities. Oftentimes we say 2 out of 10. On the national level, 1 out of 10. It just depends what kind of things you're looking at. If you're looking at severe disability versus disability more in general. For this, we're really using some of the census data, so they don't define it as severe disability necessarily. They define it in very different terms, and so we'll speak to that a little bit. Of those 93,600, 1.7% report having a visual disability, 3.7% having a hearing disability, 6.7% ambulatory disability, and again, these are the census categories, not ones that we would typically use. 4.4% having a cognitive disability, 2.1% having a self-care disability, and 4.6% having an independent living disability. And when they talk about independent living disability, they only ask that question to the persons that are 16 years of age and older. It's always difficult to give numbers in terms of people with disabilities, simply because everybody defines it differently. Special ed defines their definition differently than vocational rehabilitation and independent living. So that's one of the challenges always in front of the disability arena is how to come up with data that is reflective of what you really need it to be reflective of. But we try to use this data when we're doing some training just because it's a data source that most people are aware of. It is self-reported, so we have to remember that. And so when we speak about this, it's what people think of themselves in terms of having a disability. So, but again, we have a good number of people with disabilities in South Dakota, and with that, they have some needs that we all work to try to meet. And the one thing we really try to hit often is the fact that they may have visible disabilities, but they may have hidden disabilities. And unfortunately, a lot of people believe that if you can't see it, it's not real. And we really have to be careful with that. And in all honesty, I can think of times when I have parked somewhere and I've seen somebody getting out of a vehicle with a placard or plates on it, and all appearances would say, boy, I wonder what their disability is. And maybe even leaning toward, I wonder if they really have a disability. But that's a dangerous slope to go down, and so we really have to be careful. It's not to say we can't challenge that, because I do know people that have family members that have placards and they leave them in their car because they transport them, and then once in a while they put it up. But most of the time I would venture to say people that are hopefully using them the way they're supposed to be. But I know it's an issue that exists. But I think we really have to remember that if it's a hidden disability, it's just as real as a visible one. They are our family, friends, and neighbors, and they are us. And that is something that sometimes we forget as well. The other interesting thing about disability is that it's truly a function of age. So in other words, most of us at one time or another are going to experience disability. Just by virtue, if we live long enough and get older, we are going to have some kind of limitation, some kind of disability. Quite often it's visual, because a lot of visual disabilities come as a result of aging. Hearing is another one that comes as a result of aging. But there are others, such as the arthritis and those kinds of things that lead to some significant limitations too. And to show that, we like to show the statistics in terms of how often disability occurs. It's less than 1% or 0.3 of 1% of the ages 4 and under have a disability. So, not very common at that point in time. As we go to 5 to 15 years of age, it's 4.4%. So it's 10 times, better than 10 times what it was for the younger ones. Go to 16 to 20, it's 6.4%. And then 21 to 64, 8.7. And then 65 to 74 really jumps, 21.4%, and then 75 or older, 50.6. And considering that, I recently read that our life expectancy is increasing significantly, and I think women, the average is now 79, if I remember correctly, and men are in that mid to lower 70s. Again, the reality is that most of us are going to experience, or many of us, disability at some point in time in our life. And that's not a good or a bad thing, it's just a reality of life as we live it. So the question I'd like to ask you guys, so I'm not just talking, is disability is natural or is it? And what do you think about that? And I know there's lots of people out there, and there's 3 people here, so 4 people here.
I think it's a lot of times natural.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else out there in the other sites? Natural or not? Anybody there?
I'd say when you look at the statistics and then think back to the last time you were in public, there's definitely some hidden disabilities out there. Mm-hmm. There has to be, right?
Yep, there is. And there's people with disabilities that maybe aren't as visible. They're not hidden, but they're not as visible either. And I'm thinking specifically people with macular degeneration who can walk around fine, but if you say hi to them and they don't recognize you, you're wondering why they don't. Well, the nature of the vision loss is that. I would propose to you, and when Eric was reading the little bit of bio, all I thought of is, boy, I'm old and I've been around a long time, and I tried to cut it down because I just say it means I've been around a long time. But I would, after all these years, I still would suggest to you that when we encounter disability in an older person, we think of it as natural. And so when grandma or mom or sister or brother, whoever, depending on her age, has some experience of disability, be it age or whatever, we just know we need to make some accommodations, we need to make some changes, etc. And we just do what we need to do to include them in the activities of our family and our community, and etc. I would suggest to you, though, that if it happens at an early age, we don't react that same way. And as a culture, we don't either. It's something very different then, and we don't know what to do with it, and we become very anxious and very uncomfortable with that because it shouldn't happen. And yet statistics would say that it is natural. It happens at every age group. It happens for various reasons, whether you're born with it, whether it's an illness that occurs when you're young, whether it's an accident when you're a teenager. It is a natural occurrence. But again, as a culture, we've tended not to see it that way. And I just suggest that because I think that would help us. I've often wondered if, is it better if we all felt and treated it like when it occurs in an older person? Would that be the better way? I mean, I don't know after all these years, but but I do wonder, and part of that is having relationships and with the people and knowing them and wanting to include them, but I think we continue to have that kind of tension between when it occurs, how it occurs, and then whether we see it as natural or whether we think it's a tragedy, it's a whatever that occurred, and then we react very differently to it. Any reaction to that? I'm just wowing you guys on a Tuesday afternoon at 2:25. Well, we'll go to the next one, and then we're going to go to a video, and I'm going to have Eric try to make sure you guys don't fall asleep during the video. But I wanted to hit some real basics here in terms of welcoming all people. And you all know these for the most part, but it's always a good refresher. Recently, I was at a civil rights conference in Sioux Falls. Very good conference, a lot of dynamic people there, but it was amazing to me how often we heard the word handicapped in the course of that conference. And so, you know, as much as we think we've really we've lived it, we're doing it, we're, you know, everybody's gotten there, well, you realize in different arenas that we haven't gotten there yet, and we got some work to do. So these are just some basic concepts that are important to keep in front of us. And one is people with disabilities are people first. And again, I think it's a generational thing. I know my people that are my parents' age, you know, they grew up with handicap, crippled, whatever, and you can correct them as many times as you want, and you can be as sensitive or as blunt as you want, and they're still going to revert back to that because that's just how they grew up. They're not meaning to be offensive in any way, shape, or form, but it's their language. So we try to promote, you know, people first language and people first interaction. Treat adults as adults. I'm surprised when I see the situations where people somewhat talk down to other people, especially if there's somebody with some type of maybe visible disability of some sort that they've made some judgment about the person's intellectual capabilities, whether it's accurate or not. And so we need to really be careful about that when we're talking to a 40-year-old, they're not that girl over there. And I see that even in our church sometimes, because we have some individuals who worship and are part of our congregation, and I'll hear again some of the older people refer to them as kids and whatever, and I'm like, well, they're not kids, they're 40, 50 years old, you know, and, well, I know that, but, you know, and so it's just one of those things. Ask, don't assume. I think critical that we ask if people need help. It was interesting, I was at a banquet recently where my mother was there with me, and we had a person with a pretty significant disability sitting by us, and it was, my mom just wasn't sure what to do with that. I mean, she was like, should I ask if she needs help, or should I not, or whatever, and I said, yeah, ask. If she says no, then she says no, and you don't need to do anything, but, you know, don't think you have to rush in and do whatever, but again, that's just kind of the way in which they grew up and how they viewed people. Create environments that permit people with hidden disabilities to disclose if necessary. This is a tough one. A lot of people with hidden disabilities don't know whether to disclose or not because they're fearful of some discrimination or some negative action as a result of disclosing that they have a disability, and especially when it comes to employment. So this is one that when we talk with people and they'll say, well, you know, should I tell them? I mean, that's really a personal decision, you know, but we will say that if you need an accommodation in employment, you're going to need to speak to the need for the accommodation. You don't have to speak to the disability necessarily, but if you're going to say, for me to do this task, I'm going to need this to be this way, that part you're going to have to talk about, or you can't expect them to provide the accommodation that's needed. So work with me, not on me. I think we all would prefer that. Do with me, not for me. And then the last one, apply basic courtesies to all people. So, you know, again, just some basic concepts, some things that I keep in front of me all the time in an effort to just remind myself, because no matter how much we think we've come beyond maybe where we were, we can find ourselves slipping back into behaviors and actions and words sometimes that we don't mean to, and it's just a good reminder that, you know, let's treat people as people first, and we'll go from there. So any comments or questions at this point before we move into a video or a DVD here that we're going to do? Hearing none. Eric, the tech master, is going to get this going.
Oh.
This is called Getting It Right, and again, it'll probably be a refresher for many of you, maybe for some not. This is one that we can definitely make available if you want to do some training for some folks or whatever. It's based on an employment setting and has some humor in it, so you're encouraged to laugh if you feel so inclined and not have to feel like you have to be quiet or whatever. And with that, we'll get it started. We're going to go through the whole thing. That seems a more effective way than to do a section and stop and whatever. So we'll do that. It's about 32 minutes, and then we'll come back and talk about some other stuff.
See, you shouldn't have said what did you say? Tech master?
Mm-hmm. What's up in the corner now? So it's it's on the screen.
It's up there, but it's not. Let's see. All right. Here we go.
There you go. We hope.
All right.
You need to realize Eric has about 4 remote controls here that he's trying to figure out which is going to do what. So,
let's see. No, I hit the wrong button. I should. Let's try this. Are you guys seeing that?
Yeah. Press
Okay.
English.
Press English.
there we go.
All right, we got her now. Oops, I had it.
Tell you look good in purple.
Thank you. You do. A little feminine.
Ned, Ted, Jeff.
Ted.
Hello, Beth.
Ted?
So, anyone know what's on today's agenda?
That's a training on political correctness. Just what I need to occupy an hour of my morning.
I hope they use puppets instead of people. I love puppets. What? Puppetry is a very beautiful and ancient art form, dating back at least 30,000 years, and sometimes they hit each other with sticks. Come on! Everybody loves Punch and Judy.
Anyway, I hear we're doing something about handicapped people today. Is that?
Oh, I know all about working with the handicapped. I work with you, don't I?
That's funny. That was good. That was really good. Ned, if you keep talking like that, I'm going to put you into a wheelchair, okay?
Seriously, does anyone know anything about working with the handicapped? You know, I always get a little freaked out when I see them. Maybe this training might actually help.
Well, me too. Although they don't freak me out nearly as much as clowns do.
You know, I heard you're not supposed to touch their helper dogs. Yeah, don't really know why, but they could be trained to attack.
They should attack clowns.
I know you're supposed to talk louder and slower to deaf people, right? Or is it blind people?
Neither one. You're supposed to talk louder and slower to people in wheelchairs because they're so much lower than you are.
I wonder if the training will cover how to work with mentally handicapped. That way it might help me figure out how to work with you guys.
No. Oh, you guys ever seen Edward Scissorhands?
I love that movie.
Do you think Edward would be considered handicapped?
Why? Because he has scissors for hands?
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess if he didn't oil them, the blades could get rusty. And even then, what would be the problem with that?
Well, you could end up with a haircut like Beth's.
Here's a politically correct question for you guys. If a person who can't see is called blind, and a person who can't hear is called deaf, and a person who can't talk is called mute, what do you call a person with no taste? Ted.
Oh, I see what you did with the...
Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for coming to today's voluntary diversity training, especially since I know this is the last place you wanted to spend your morning.
I don't know that I would say it's the last place.
I would.
Well, my hope is that by the end of this session, you'll agree that our time together was worthwhile. Who knows? You might even learn something. After all, diversity training covers a lot of ground. Today, we're going to cover some civil rights issues facing the country's largest minority group, people with disabilities. So before we get started, are there any questions?
Would there be a quiz?
No quiz.
Well, then why do we need to do it?
Like I said, people with disabilities make up the country's largest minority group, with over 54 million people. And it's the only minority group that any of you could someday become part of. Let's say Ted and Beth go out to lunch today after this meeting.
Yeah, like that's gonna happen.
Okay. Let's say Ted and Ned go out to lunch today, and Ned wrecks the car.
Are we in the company car?
No, Ted. It's Ned's car.
No, I just want to make sure that we're not in the company car, because we're not supposed to use the company car for lunch, and I don't want to have to do like a company car training session.
You're not in trouble, Ted. But because of the wreck, you become a wheelchair user for the rest of your life.
Thanks a lot, Ned.
But the point is, you could become a person with a disability that easily and that quickly.
I don't see anything easy about it.
As for the rest of you, if you live long enough, there's a good chance you'll acquire at least one disability. In fact, almost 75% of all people over the age of 80 live with at least one disability. What I'm getting at is this. At some point, you will interact with people with disabilities, whether it's a coworker, a customer, or even someone in your family. I know lots of people try to avoid dealing with people with disabilities because it makes you feel uncomfortable. And while it's okay to feel uncomfortable, you should remember that people with disabilities are people first. So it's better for everyone involved if you have some basic guidelines on how to deal with those situations, rather than always trying to avoid them. And that's why we are here today. First, I'm going to show you a few short scenes involving people with disabilities.
Excuse me.
Yes, Ted?
Ned would like to know if there are going to be any puppets involved.
Puppets?
Puppets are actually a very ancient art form, dating back, 30,000 years?
And they hit each other with sticks.
No, Ted. There won't be any puppets. Just people with disabilities going about their daily lives. These scenes will give you some basic guidelines on how to interact with people with different types of disabilities. They might even make you laugh. The scenes, not the people. After we're done, we'll have some Q&A. Is everybody ready?
More than 54 million Americans have a disability. So, talking about disability etiquette makes a lot of sense. Mastering disability etiquette is about managing your mindset, altering your attitude, getting past the PC, and coming to a shared understanding of who we are and what we want from one another. Here are some ways to move beyond the things that make us different and learn to appreciate the bonds we have in common.
Well, you don't see this every day. You better call the school nurse. What happened, Rock?
I taught him a lesson.
A lesson?
Yep.
What kind of lesson?
Kind of lesson they'll never forget.
I see. Better not touch that, Mrs. Gladstone. We want to follow protocol here. Look, Rock, I believe in experiential learning as much as the next underpaid public bureaucrat, but this, don't you think this is going a little too far?
I was just taking it to the real world, sir.
If our parents get wind of this, we won't have a leg to stand on.
How could you have done such a thing, Mr. Turgidson?
The spirit of scientific inquiry.
But you're a PE teacher.
Well, it was more like a dare.
A what?
I dared him.
You dared him?
All right, I double dared him.
You double dared them?
Okay. I double dog dared him. You satisfied?
Freezing metal, wet tongues. I can't believe they fell for it.
It's a talented and gifted class.
Figures. You are a cold man, Rock. Cold.
What do people who use wheelchairs have in common with you? Everything. So treat them the way you treat everyone else. Wheelchair users are people. Never lean over them as if they were furniture. It's rude.
Look, Rock, I believe in experiential learning as much as the next underpaid public bureaucrat, but this, don't you think this is going a little too far?
Don't push or touch a person's wheelchair. It's part of his personal space and should be treated that way.
Better not touch that, Mrs. Gladstone. We want to follow protocol here.
When addressing a person in a wheelchair, be polite. Meet them at eye level.
A what?
I dared him.
You dared him?
All right, I double dared him.
Don't be afraid to use common or familiar phrases like, we won't have a leg to stand on, or he's a stand-up guy. People in wheelchairs appreciate common phrases just like everyone else.
If our parents get wind of this, we won't have a leg to stand on.
How could...
Be courteous. Don't patronize people in wheelchairs. Treat them as you would anyone else.
You are a cold man, Rock. Cold.
Other things to remember. Assistive devices such as wheelchairs or crutches are considered part of someone's personal space. Don't move someone's equipment without their permission. Don't park in accessible parking spaces unless you have a permit. Allow those who need them the use of accessible features such as restrooms and elevators.
So we're supposed to be kind of playing around. And right. Like,
what is the problem, people?
Jake says that the blocking is all wrong.
Wrong!
That's what he says.
Wrong how?
Don't look at me. Ask Mr. Ed over here.
Jake!
I tried to tell you this 100 times. The lighting and the blocking.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Could you repeat it for me? Quiet on the set! I'm supposed to be a stallion. Equine god. But the way the lighting is hitting me, I feel like a horse's... I get your point, Jake. How about if you and Muriel change places and we start the action at stage right? Would that help you at all?
Hey, watch it, Pokey. You'll put an eye out.
Don't you make me come down there, and I am not kidding. If Pete hears about this, we'll all be in jail.
You know what people with a speech disability have in common with you? Everything. So treat them the way you treat everyone else. A person with a speech disability may be difficult to understand, so give them your full attention.
Jake!
I tried to tell you this 100 times. The lighting and the blocking.
If you don't understand, ask the person to repeat himself.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Could you repeat it for me?
A quiet environment often makes communication easier.
Quiet on the set!
Treat those with speech disabilities the same way you'd like to be treated.
Hey, watch it, Pokey. You'll put an eye out.
Don't you make me come down there, and I am not kidding.
And remember, the ability to communicate effectively is serious to all of us. Other things to remember. If you're not sure exactly what someone has said, repeat back to him what you thought you heard him say. Allow someone with a speech disability to finish her thought. Don't assume that you know what she is going to say. You may need to ask someone to write down what they are trying to say. Never pretend to understand what someone said when you did not.
Sonny Blackstone, I got some Kung Pao chicken walking in the dough, brother.
It smells like lunch is here.
Yes, sir.
All right. What you looking at, boy?
That's some axe.
Ah, yeah. Yeah, you play?
A little.
All right. What's your name, son?
Josh.
Sonny Blackstone.
I know. I've been listening to your music my entire life.
Your entire life, huh?
Pretty much.
All right. So you got a favorite?
Song?
Yeah.
Well, it's gotta be I'll See You When I See You.
Yeah, that's right up there with Mess With My Dog, You Mess With My Head.
That's a good song.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Definitely an excellent song.
All right. Hey, you know, there should be a guitar right over there next to you. Go ahead, pick it up. You ready?
Yeah.
Here we go, then. Oh, yeah.
What do people who are blind have in common with you? Everything. So treat them the way you treat everyone else. When speaking to someone who is blind, identify yourself by name. Shake hands if offered.
What's your name, son?
Josh.
Sonny Blackstone.
I know.
Speak in a normal voice and tone. There's no reason to shout at someone who is blind.
I've been listening to your music my entire life.
Your entire life, huh?
Pretty much.
All right.
Don't worry about using common or familiar phrases like, I'll see you, or watch this.
Well, it's gotta be I'll see you when I see you.
Never pet or distract a service animal. They're working animals, not pets.
Mess with my dog, you mess with my head.
These animals have been specially trained to assist their owners. Distracting them could disrupt this ongoing training. Distracting an animal could also pose a safety risk if its owner is unaware of an outside force influencing his or her animal. Other things to remember. Let someone who is blind know if you're leaving or walking away. Offer assistance, and if it's accepted, follow the given instructions on how to help.
We're going to take a break right here and just see if we can get a little interaction going here, contrary to what I said earlier. One of the things I heard recently at the Civil Rights Conference, and it stuck with me, is that 99.5% of who we are is the same. 0.5 of 1% is the difference. And yet we tend to focus on that, and we've spent a lot of time talking about why indeed we did that. But some of the other things, so I just want to leave that with you. Other things, though, that I saw on that, and I guess I'd ask you for what you saw. One of the things, leaving the accessible features for people with disabilities that might need them, and yet the other thing we don't want to do is have 5, in this case women, standing in line for a restroom, and there's nobody there that appears to need the accessible one, but nobody's going to use it because it's there for the person that needs it. Well, that's going way to the other extreme. Again, so if there's somebody there that obviously has need for that feature, we make that available to them, but if there isn't, we can feel comfortable using it. And I've seen that happen many, many times in various places. Other thing, finishing thoughts for others, and I personally think this is becoming more of an issue even just because of how we communicate these days and the lack of maybe listening to one another. That it's very easy, especially if we sense somebody's struggling and we're becoming uncomfortable with that, to want to finish it for them. And again, not to do that, but to let them finish whatever they're wanting to say, because again, we don't know what it is, what they want to say. Other thoughts or reactions from any of you that you had as you watched those vignettes?
I can see with Alzheimer's becoming more and more popular, to finish a person's sentence or their thought with that. And I don't know if that's anything or not, but...
You see it a lot with older people. The other thing you see with older people is something that you see with people with visual impairments, and that is people asking the person with them. And that happened to me yesterday again with my mother, and somebody said, well, how does she feel? I said, ask her. It was like, she talks, she hears, she sees. I mean, it might not be the best, but she does. But yeah, we have a tendency to do that, and that's one thing we want to get away from. Any other reactions or thoughts?
Hi.
I think what you just...
It's Dawn, and they said on public yesterday was that people with do very well with spelling. Am I... Okay, they give them cue cards, pictures, and then they make up their own story, and they can do this, but they can't do things from memory. And it actually makes them happy, and they can communicate that, like they can see a picture of a couple and say, well, they're married, and just they're going for a walk, and that way they can share without feeling belittled or embarrassed or bad. But they said they're starting to do that storyboarding with a lot of Alzheimer's patients, and they want to do that in the future too.
Thank you, Don. Eric, you were going to add something?
You know, I was going to say something about, but I think sometimes if you work in our field long enough, you forget how much you didn't know about interacting with people with disabilities. And then it surprises you, like when you mentioned the instance with your mother more than a day or two ago. It surprises you because you've learned so much since you got into the field.
And that's an excellent observation. I think we don't step back and recognize that a lot of times with people that aren't in the arena, and we have the same expectation they should be where we're at, and that's not fair. And whether that's new staff or whether that's people that for the first time are encountering somebody in their family with a disability or a friend, yeah, it's all foreign, and what do I do with this, and how do I do this, and I don't want to do the wrong thing, and and we forget that. Yeah, that's an excellent point.
Do you think it's changed over time, though? I mean, do you think we're as an entire population, further more accepting, more understanding of the right way to behave around minorities and people with disabilities than we were 20, 30? Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a generational thing earlier, that the language was different back then. I think it's changed some.
It's changed, and I think for children it's probably more evident than even us in our ages. And I tell you this, again, at the Civil Rights Conference, the people that were speaking, I'm guessing were comparable to my age, our age, the keynote speakers. And we were there an hour and a half before the term disability ever was said, which amazed me, because we were there about civil rights, and when I think of civil rights, I think of people with disabilities as part of that picture. But again, the general population still hasn't gotten there. They think of the civil rights of the 60s, and that's that, and that's where it ends. And we don't teach. I don't know that we teach the ADA in civics and history and in education. So have we made progress? Yes, and have kids are growing up with peers and friends that have disabilities, and so they're learning things that we never had the opportunity to learn until later on, because I don't know about you, but I know in my school, I never saw a person with a disability. They weren't there, or if they were, it was hidden and nobody ever talked about it. So yeah, I think we've made some progress, but I'm sorry to have to say, I think I've always said if we could work ourselves out of a job, and I don't think that day is coming anytime soon, because we still have a lot of work to do. Yeah.
We have a gentleman that comes in our office, and they always come and get me no matter what, because he had a brain injury and he has processing problems and he can't talk. So everybody automatically assumes that he can't hear. Well, he can hear, but he sometimes it's like static or something. But for the most part, he can hear. And the last time he was in, they came and got me out of frustration because I'll sit and write notes with him all day until I figure out, what he needs to try to get done. And the people that didn't know what to do with him came in my office with me and him. And he gets really frustrated, and I don't blame him because he can't communicate that.
Right.
And we've tried working with him. They have those little boards that are, and he won't use them. Yeah. And he's just adamant about that. And it's really sad, though, that, they would talk in front of him, and I was appalled. I couldn't believe that what they were saying, because finally I just said, he can hear. And they were like, oh.
Yeah.
After like 15 minutes,
Right.
because they had been saying, well, he does this and he does that, and
as if he wasn't there.
Yeah, and it was kind of belittling to him. I'm sure that even frustrated him even more.
I'm sure.
Because it frustrated me. Just, finally, I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to point it out because I didn't want him to feel worse. Finally, I just said, you know what, he can hear what you're saying.
Yeah. Oh, and understand.
Yeah, he just can't make you understand.
Just can't make you understand, but yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to try to figure out what he wants, and it's always Keith or I that they'll come get him. Usually if Keith's traveling, it always ends up that he comes on a day that Keith's not there, so it's me that they call, and I'll go out, and sometimes he'll just say,
yep.
And he'll point over at the other office, and I'm like, can I help you? And we write notes back and forth. But I know it's got to be really frustrating for him.
Sure. That's a great example of, and that's, that would be where it would be good to have some training or have some real life examples like that and be able to visit with people and do some training with other staff saying, hey, just because a person has this type of disability doesn't mean this, and don't assume some things, and have that basic conversation with them, because again, they don't know. They're just, when I started as a rehab counselor, I can remember, and I've told this story often, so some of you have probably heard it, but I remember being told, when I was a rehab counselor for services blind and visually impaired, that people have a tendency to speak more loudly to people who are blind or visually impaired. And I thought, how stupid. They can hear, most of them hopefully, and if they're older, maybe they have some loss, but why would anybody do that? And I think I was probably 3 months into the job, and I was talking with somebody, and I realized I was doing exactly that thing. And it was a compensation thing that I wasn't even aware that was a part of me, kind of thing. But I recognized it, and I was like, oh my God, I'm doing it, So yeah, I think, when we're uncomfortable, we compensate, and sometimes we compensate in ways that are not the best, and if we can help each other realize that there are better ways to do it, then that's always better for everybody involved. And you do that by showing them, and hopefully they can pick up on that. But it might just mean some training too, and saying, hey folks, we need to
I think a lot of the other state offices should have to go through training, because more and more there is a bigger population of people with disabilities, and they don't know how to handle them. And luckily for us, the office we're in, if any of them go into social services, they just come get us.
Right.
But they shouldn't. That shouldn't be.
That
they
shouldn't
should
be the
know
way
how to
it is.
handle
That's
it too.
right. They should know how to handle the situation and how to interact with people, whatever the disability. Yeah. Good conversation. Thank you. Well, let's look at the rest of the video, and then we'll have a little more and go on from there. And we might go till 4 if you guys keep this up. No. Julie just gave me the evil eyes. So. No.
That was a heck of a time, wasn't it, Carly?
I really lost it. The only friends I had after that last episode were the invisible ones in my head. Thought my dad was going to grow a beard and move out of town.
He was just worried about you, that's all.
Yeah. He's a good guy. I thought God was talking to me.
This is good, right?
I sort of miss it.
It'll happen again. I'm sure of it. Only now that you're back to feeling like your old self again, the conversation will make more sense.
You think so?
Cross my heart.
You know, I'm really glad you were there, Pastor Lee. Talking to you made all the difference. I know it helped my dad, too. He says he's personally recommending you for sainthood.
We're just glad that you're feeling better.
Call me crazy, but if it weren't for you, I'm not so sure I would have made such a quick recovery.
So, how's the new job going? Is your boss treating you well?
I'm pretty sure my boss is a jerk, but just in case that's the drugs talking, let's just say I'm enjoying myself.
Good. That's the way it should be.
Amen.
So, what do people with psychiatric disabilities have in common with you? Everything. So treat them the way you treat everyone else. One of the main obstacles people with disabilities face is other people's attitudes. So be supportive. Treat them as you would anyone else.
That was a heck of a time, wasn't it, Carly?
I really lost it. The only friends I had after that last episode were the invisible ones in my head.
Their disability may affect their ability to feel, think, and relate to others. Characteristically, people like this are not dangerous.
I thought God was talking to me.
This is good, right?
Sort of miss it.
It'll happen again. I'm sure of it.
In a crisis, be a good friend. Stay calm and supportive, and ask what you can do to be of help.
You know, I'm really glad you were there, Pastor Lee. Talking to you made all the difference.
Treat people with psychiatric disabilities as individuals. Respect them as people.
So, how's the new job going? Is your boss treating you well?
Other things to remember. Show respect. Listen and extend basic courtesy. Don't make assumptions about someone's limitations because of any disability. Don't gossip about anyone's disability. Attitudes are still the greatest barrier that people with disabilities face.
Before we move on to the next one, I just want to make sure that everyone's with us because our screen went black here. If I can just get one other site to let me know that you're still there.
Rapids here.
Okay. All right.
Hey, hurry up, babe. You're gonna miss the end.
Hold on, the pasta's almost done.
Just leave it. It'll be fine. You're studying to be a doctor, not a chef.
Are you kidding? I hate soggy pasta.
Sean, you're missing it.
I'll be right there.
Do you need a hand?
No, I'm just waiting on the Alfredo sauce.
Yeah, I killed her. Now I'm going to kill you. Won't have to worry about you again no more.
Well, you missed it.
The one-armed man did it.
How do you know?
Just a lucky guess.
What do people with prosthetics have in common with you? Everything. So treat them the way you treat everyone else. Treat people with disabilities the same way you treat everyone else.
Hey, hurry up, babe. You're gonna miss the end.
Offer assistance, but don't help unless your offer is accepted. And hey, don't worry about using familiar phrases. People with disabilities use them too.
Do you need a hand?
No, I'm just waiting on the Alfredo sauce.
Extend and accept common courtesies, just as you would for anyone else. And remember, people with disabilities are just like the rest of us.
Well, you missed it.
The one-armed man did it.
How do you know?
Just a lucky guess.
Other things to remember. It is perfectly acceptable to shake someone's prosthesis or hook. It is also okay to shake someone's left hand. Don't stare at someone with a disability. It could be considered impolite to ask someone, especially a stranger, about his or her disability.
much Harpo. Too much Harpo marks. Not enough Marcel Marceau. Here, try this. But remember to use your wrists. Not bad, but remember, it's all about story. We're talking the fragility of life here. You know, butterflies and lions. Pluto's downgrade from planet to dwarf planet. You hadn't heard that? Me either. Thanks, but I'm allergic. That's it for today. Practice up and remember. Mine is money.
What do people who are deaf have in common with you? Everything. So treat them the way you would treat everyone else. Speak directly to the person with the disability, not to their companion or interpreter.
Too much Harpo marks. Not enough Marcel Marceau.
Don't obscure your face when speaking to someone who is deaf or hard of hearing. Seeing your face can help him better understand what you're saying. Speak in a normal voice and tone. Never shout. If the person is wearing a hearing aid, it will calibrate to the normal voice levels. Don't worry about using common or familiar phrases like, "You hadn't heard that?" People who are hard of hearing or deaf use common speech just like the rest of us.
You hadn't heard that? Me either.
Other things to remember. It is okay to tap someone who is deaf on the shoulder to get his or her attention. Don't eat or chew gum while speaking. It can make lip reading more difficult. Also, never assume that someone who is deaf reads lips. Only a small percentage of people who are deaf lip read fluently.
So, does anyone have any questions?
I have one. You always say people with disabilities instead of disabled people or people with handicaps or the disabled person. What's up with that?
Because people with disabilities are just like you and me. They don't like to be labeled or defined by their disability. For instance, I'm sure you'd rather be known by your name, not just labeled the bespectacled person or Mrs. Magoo, wouldn't you?
Sure.
When you put the person first, you're using what's called people first language. And it's just simple courtesy. Everybody wants to be thought of as a person first. Also, the term handicapped is considered very derogatory by people with disabilities.
Yeah, but if that's true, then why do they have handicapped parking spaces and handicapped restrooms?
Let's think about that. Do those terms even make sense? Can a parking space or a restroom be handicapped? They don't have a disability. It's better to refer to those things as accessible.
So, accessible parking spaces and accessible restrooms?
Exactly. You should also avoid terms like wheelchair bound or confined to a wheelchair. People use wheelchairs just like you use your legs. They're not tied to their wheelchairs with ropes or caged in them.
Yeah.
Here's another. You don't say someone is suffering from blindness or some other disability.
But I hear news reporters use those terms all the time, especially handicapped.
You're right, they do. But that doesn't make it right. Disability rights and disability advocacy are relatively young fields. The Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, was just signed into law on July 26, 1990, whereas other civil rights legislation has been around since the mid-60s. Our hope is that, given enough time and training, reporters and everyone else for that matter will treat the term handicapped like they do the N-word and stop using it altogether.
You know, a lot of what we're talking about just seems to be common sense.
Exactly. It's said that the best advice can be summed up in 5 key words: common sense and good faith effort.
That was 6 words.
I don't count and, Ned.
Oh. Okay, I have another question. What's the big deal about asking a person with a disability if he needs help? I mean, why not be a good Samaritan, jump in, and seems like we're creating an extra step here.
Another good question. As we've learned, people who are deaf or blind or use a wheelchair are just like you and me, independent. Most of the time they can get along just fine without any help at all.
But what if it looks like they're struggling?
You know, it's okay to ask if you can help. That's just common courtesy. Just don't go freelancing.
All right, I get the part about the terminology, right? People first, disability, not handicapped, yada, yada, yada. And all right, it makes sense to ask someone before helping them. But I don't really get this whole touching part. Why is everyone so touchy about being touched? I mean, why is it a problem that I put my hand on someone's wheelchair or I'm petting their dog?
Well, for one thing, it's you doing the touching.
I'm serious.
Hey, Ted, you weren't paying attention. They covered all that in the video earlier.
That's okay. We can expand on it. The wheelchair or the service animal is part of their personal space. So touching their chair or their dog is like touching them. And you wouldn't want strangers coming up and touching you, would you?
Remember, this is Ted we're talking about.
The other part of the answer deals with safety.
Safety?
Sure. People with disabilities depend on their various aids for mobility, and touching them when they're not expecting it could inadvertently cause an accident or a distraction.
Huh. I never really thought about that.
But that's my point. Most people don't think of it in those terms. Which brings us to another fundamental point. Relax and be yourself.
Unless, of course, you're Ned or Ted.
Hey, we resemble that remark.
What I'm getting at is that you should talk to a person with a disability the same way you speak to someone without a disability. Talk to the individual, even if they use an interpreter. And as a general rule, you shouldn't pry into how the person got their disability. It's no different than avoiding personal questions with coworkers.
So you mean I shouldn't ask Beth what happened to her hair?
Okay, here's my problem. I just get a little freaked out when I meet a person with a disability. I mean, of course, not as badly as Ned gets freaked out by clowns, but...
It's true, I do.
Beth, yours is actually a pretty normal reaction. It's just human nature to be uncomfortable with unfamiliar situations. Hopefully after today, you'll feel a little less uncomfortable the next time you meet a person with a disability.
I hope so too.
You will. Especially if you remember to think of them as a person first.
Okay, how about a hypothetical?
Ooh, someone's been using their word of the day desk calendar.
Look, if I have a friend who's got a disability and she tells me she wants to go skydiving, what should I do?
Ned, doesn't that seem a little far-fetched?
Not really. Despite what you might imagine, people with disabilities participate in all types of sports and physical activities.
Actually, I think Ted was referring to the fact that Ned might actually have a friend of the female persuasion.
Thank you, Beth.
No problem, Ted.
You guys mind if I finish my question?
Go ahead, Ned.
Thank you. What I was going to ask is, what do I do if I have a friend who uses a wheelchair and she tells me that she wants to go skydiving? You know, shouldn't I advise against it, for her own safety?
No more so than you'd advise Ted not to skydive.
Oh, I'd tell Ted to skydive. I just wouldn't tell him to use a parachute.
My point is, people with disabilities are the best judge of their own capabilities. If this friend of yours thinks she can skydive, who's to say she can't?
That makes sense.
The same holds true for everyday social functions. Let's say the company is having a summer picnic where there's a pool everyone can use.
We're having a picnic with a pool?
Cannonball! Woo! As I was saying, don't assume that someone can't swim just because she has difficulty walking or maybe blind. If you tell everyone else to bring a swimsuit, be sure to tell her too.
Well, it's like that old adage, don't assume because it makes a donkey out of you and me.
What?
I don't like to curse.
I know what you mean, Beth. So to sum up, there are really just a few key things to remember when it comes to disability etiquette. 1, terminology. Use people-first language. No more handicapped or wheelchair-bound. 2, ask before you help someone. It's just common courtesy. 3, relax and be yourself. Use common sense and remember the golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated. And 4th, don't make assumptions because, as Beth said, they make a donkey out of you and me. People with disabilities are a unique minority, the only minority in the world that each of us, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, age, or cultural background, might one day join. So by striving to treat others as equals today, whatever their disability, you're helping to make the world a better place for all of us, even for Ted. But I'm not sure about Ned.
Hey.
Just kidding, Ned. Thank you all for coming this morning. Call me if you have any questions.
Thanks. Thank you. Oh, that wasn't so bad. I think I might have actually learned something.
Well, like she said, it's common sense.
No, Sarah, because she's a woman.
Oh, yeah, right. That's why I'm saying it, because she's the woman. Yeah.
Any comments or reactions on any of those? Anything that stuck out? Besides Ned and Ted are like the comedic pair, supposedly. Well, I'll just hit a couple of things, and some of this within the video, others are not. But there are some common assumptions that we oftentimes fall into when it comes to persons with disabilities, and one is that a person with a disability wants or needs assistance. And we just assume that, well, because like somebody was saying, it's more difficult or whatever, that we need to rush to the rescue of the person or assist them. So it is important to realize that they may or may not. And again, the best thing is to ask that. When they accept your offer for help, if you offer, then again, waiting to see what they want you to do. And that's something oftentimes you see people not doing, is that they kind of rush in and well, I'll help you get through this doorway, or I'll do whatever, and the person was doing just fine without the assistance, and so we do want to be careful with that. Another assumption we often make, and this is one I think we make in terms of employment, living independently, whatever it might be, a person with a disability is dissatisfied with his or her quality of life and thus is seeking pity. Not necessarily. There are lots of people that make lots of life choices that we don't agree with necessarily, people with and without disabilities, and that's each of our right to do. So we need to be careful not to think of it as they're dissatisfied and such. That a person with disability is easily offended, I know some that are, I know some that aren't. They are people, and critical again to remember that and not put the disability as the reason that they would be offended or whatever the case may be. Another thing is that you might encounter somebody who doesn't appear to have a disability, or maybe sometimes you see them and they use an assistive device of some sort, and the next time you see them and they don't, and so there again could be that tendency to wonder, well, do they really have a disability or not? But I think one of the things we know is that people with, for instance, a systemic kind of disability or progressive nature of a disability might have very good days where they wouldn't need that assistive device, and then there's going to be other days when they're definitely going to have to rely upon it. It doesn't mean who they are has changed. It just means that it's one day worse than the other, and therefore they might need the assistance, and another day they don't. When a person with disability is in public, being escorted, and we've talked about this a little bit, speak to them instead of speaking with the other, and also think of them as, and they are an individual. They're not the caretaker. They're not the whatever. They are traveling independently. They need that support. That's the only difference. And so I recognize it as just that it's a tool that assists them to be as independent as they desire to be. All people with certain types of disabilities have similar needs and characteristics, and you see this often, I think, in the people with visual impairments, certain visual impairments, people with deafness, others. You just kind of lump them together and think, well, if this works for one, it's going to work for the other. Well, again, as individuals, we all know that isn't how things work, so to keep that in mind. Disability is the reason for a person's rudeness. I would suggest that if you were a jerk before you had a disability, you'll probably be a jerk afterwards, and the opposite is true. The disability isn't the reason. It's, we are who we are as people. The disability is one small piece of who we are. And so to remember that and realize, and I was having this conversation with some folks the other day, and I said, well, this group of people, and it wasn't people with disabilities, but, well, they can be really rude. And I said, well, excuse me, we can be really rude too. So what's the difference? I mean, we're people, we have our better points and our lesser points, and it's nothing to do with a cultural background or ethnic or disability. It's just who we are as people. And then that the disability is the reason a person is not successful in employment. One of the things we've found in our training that we're doing with the Freedom to Work Project and work incentives and beneficiaries is that a lot of people might make that assumption that the disability is keeping a person from being successful. I think we have to be honest that there are people with disabilities who choose not to work no matter what, and there are people without disabilities that choose not to work no matter what. That may or may not be the issue. And we don't want to make the assumption that it is. We want to get to know the person, find out for sure what's going on, and then go from there in terms of how we might support or serve them depending on the role that we're in. So just a few more things to keep in mind. And I guess any comments, questions, feedback at this point? Because then we're going to shift focus just a little bit. Everybody still there? Silence is golden, I assume they are.
Yep.
Well, we're going to shift to a topic that you might find a little surprising.
I'm sorry, did we have a question from the audience?
No, we just said we were still here.
Okay, all right.
Okay, we're glad you're still there. Well, then we're going to shift our focus just a little bit, and you might wonder why. And we're going to shift it to people with disabilities as victims of crime. Recently, the Coalition has had the opportunity to begin working more closely with a couple of other entities, and in fact, we've submitted a federal grant to work in this arena. We've been working with the South Dakota Network Against Family Violence and Sexual Assault, and also with CSD. And then we also have participated in some training on a national level in relation to people with disabilities as crime victims. And the reason I wanted to bring this up, as we talk disability etiquette or just people with disabilities in general, it was pretty shocking to see some of the statistics, and especially because in my knowledge and my remembrance, I don't remember us very often encountering or speaking about violence being a part of people with disabilities' lives, and yet women with disabilities have a 40% greater risk of violence than women without. And so if it's occurring at the numbers that it is for people without disabilities, women without disabilities, then we know that it's occurring much more for women with. The most common perpetrators of violence against women with disabilities are their male partners, that did not surprise me. But studies estimate that 80% of women with disabilities have been sexually assaulted. That was pretty sobering. And to think again, in the many years that I've been in the arena, wondering, if do we not pick up on things? Do they not talk about it? And it's probably a combination of things. But again, reality is that very likely people that we are serving or supporting, some of them may have been victims of crime, victims of abuse, victims of assault, and it doesn't come up. And so I'm not saying we have an answer for that at this point, but I am saying that maybe we need to be a little more sensitive to the fact that might be a part of the life that they are experiencing, and one that they may not talk about, and we've got to accept that if that's the case. But I think it was just kind of an eye-opener for me personally to see those statistics. Another study showed that 47% of sexually abused women with disabilities reported assaults on more than 10 occasions. So we're not saying that this occurred once and that was it. And it doesn't for people without disabilities either, most often. But again, you know, when you think of that more than 10 occasions, that's a pretty common occurrence in somebody's life, and will have some impact of some nature. And so is that something that, again, we need to try to have our antenna up a little more in terms of what might be occurring in somebody's life. The next one I kind of knew. I don't like to think about it, but approximately 48% of substantial cases of abuse involve elder adults who are not physically able to care for themselves. I would also think, and there's not a lot of studies out on this, so it's hard to know what the statistics are, but I would also suggest to you that probably people who need to rely upon personal attendant services are at a pretty high rate of risk when it comes to being abused as well. Because again, can't do anything for themselves. So your hope is that they are being cared for by somebody who would not. But again, statistics might say that that's not the case. And do people with disabilities in some cases even know that that's what's going on? Do they know that abuse is actually taking place? And if not, how do we educate them? And so one of the things we're doing at Dare to Dream this year is we're actually having a state's attorney who went with us to Florida for some training that we went with the network and ourselves. He's going to do some training on just what it is and how to report it. Because we wonder if a lot of people don't even recognize the fact that that's what's occurring, or they're afraid because they need to rely upon a person for those supports. And if they don't have that person, then they lay there. And so pretty sobering stuff, and yet I think stuff that we want to at least have in our mind in terms of a possibility in someone's life. Children with disabilities are more than twice as likely as children without to be physically abused, and almost twice as likely to be sexually abused. So again, we hear all the stories about the people without, but not necessarily within the disability arena. And then virtually all women with disabilities who were sexually assaulted reported social, emotional, and behavioral harm. Again, wanted to bring that forward just to say, you know, maybe that needs to be on our radar a little bit. Maybe we need to be aware of what resources are out there in that arena, so that if indeed somebody does venture and is brave enough to bring it forward, that we know how best to respond to their needs. And I'll give you an example. Recently, when we were writing the grant, we were asking for some input from Centers for Independent Living about people that they might have served who had experience with domestic violence, sexual assault, whatever. And interesting enough, I got a call from somebody from a Center for Independent Living, a staff, saying, well, I just spoke with this woman. She's got a restraining order. She's living in the same town as the person that the restraining order is against. She's living in a hotel with her child. It's not the best of places, circumstances. She needs somebody to process with and figure out what her next step's going to be. And I don't know where to go. And they referred them to a local community women's shelter, but the women's shelter response, at least that's how they heard it anyway, was, if you don't live in our community, we can't help you. And they were living in a smaller community outside of there. Well, because of the partnership now that we're working on in the very initial stages with some of these other folks, we knew that the Network Against Family Violence and Sexual Assault has rural outreach workers. And so I said, well, invite the person to be in touch with me, and then I can try to get them linked up with them. In the meantime, I talked with them, and they said, yeah, make sure, and so we did what we could to try to link that together, and our hope is that we never heard back, even though we asked. Our hope is that she followed through and she got connected to somebody who could help her make some decisions about what would be the next step. But that's the concern, is that it's kind of domestic violence shelters and staff may not be well equipped to respond to people with disabilities, just like the general public. They're uncomfortable, they don't know what to do. Some shelters still have accessibility issues. At the same time, we as people in the vocational rehabilitation or independent living arena, serving people with disabilities, might not know what is the best way to keep somebody safe, and what should we be suggesting or recommending or whatever it might be. So wanted to bring that forward just as something to think of as we go into the future. And if we are successful in getting the grant, you'll know that you'll be hearing more from us, because one of the things we want to do is really challenge the two cultural arenas to look at each other and learn about each other and truly understand. And when we went to the national conference in Florida, it was, again, when you say, Eric, have we made progress, in some of the breakout sessions, it was phenomenal. This conference was designed and had victims services and disability services people there. But it was amazing to watch the interaction that occurred in some of those sessions. We heard people just wanting people to shut up and telling them so because it took them too long to talk or whatever else, or they maybe spoke on longer than they thought they should, and these were people with disabilities. And we're sitting there going, that's why we're here, folks. You don't understand what's happening here any more than we understand what's happening over here. So there really is a need to do some work and try to bring those communities together so that we can all be more responsive when somebody is in that situation. So just wanted to bring that forward, and I don't know, have you encountered that you're aware of any people that have experienced it, or have you worked with shelters and centers and had some success, or any feedback on that?
Quite a while ago, I had a women's shelter call me about a TTY for a deaf family, but that's been several years ago. But at least they were aware of it.
And the other thing we forget sometimes in this arena is that maybe the and it could be a man, because men get abused as well, but the parent may not have a disability, but what if their kids have disabilities? And if they're staying in a shelter, and what kind of supports and etc. So there's dynamics there that is a shelter equipped to have a mother there with a child with autism? And so again, how do we work together to ensure that the person has the most beneficial experience that they can have in that situation? So.
You're right. Some pretty. It is surprising to see some of these statistics. 80% of women with disabilities have been sexually assaulted. That is extreme.
Yeah, and those are from the National Center on Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence and such. And again, the hope is there's going to be more study in this arena, so we can get we can drill down more to see exactly what's going on. I would think there might be some populations that are more susceptible to it than others, but that would just be a guess on my part, And so the hope is we'll get more research in this, so we can be better know for sure what's going on and why things are happening. Well, any questions, comments, feedback? At this point, Eric's going to take just a moment to put a video in that we wanted to show you. It's 3 minutes, so it's not going to take you a long time to watch, but are there any comments or any feedback at this point?
Shelley, this is Peggy Yankton. In your travels, do you find a lot where the attendant sort of takes over for the person with a disability? Like they'll do the talking for them, and it's almost impossible to speak to the person? Because we've had clients in the past that come in, and the one in particular, his mother was his attendant. It was almost impossible to talk to the client because she would interrupt and answer the questions. I just was wondering how you would handle that.
Yeah, Peggy,
how far I could go in saying.
Well, go ahead.
No, how far I can go in saying, I need to make the appointment with him, and and at the time he was pretty quiet and let her do it, so it's always made me. It was very upsetting for me because he didn't have the independence and was almost we were all kind of scared of her actually, but.
Well, you should be scared of parents,
Yeah, well, she was special, so. But I just don't know if you see that a lot, where you said to talk to the person, not the attendant, but sometimes that attendant takes control.
Right. I think part of it is and family members take control, and part of that you've got to get a feel for who you're with. I mean, if, like you said, he was kind of quiet and was letting that go on, maybe that's how he was more comfortable, and if that's the case, then that's the way it's going to go. But to find a way in which to see, I guess I would try to explore it at some point with him, and see if he really was that comfortable with it, or he just didn't know how to make it any different, and how you then could help him make it different. And it might be saying, Mom, I need to just meet with Jim today. We've got some things we got to work through. If you want to wait here, I'll get you some coffee, whatever. But we need to have some conversation by ourselves. But I'd want to get a feel for their relationship, because I wouldn't want in this case I used the name Jim, to suffer any consequences because of my suggesting that either. So I think you've really got to get to know the people a bit. Some people like other people talking for them. I don't, needless to say. But some people do, and they get used to it, and they get comfortable with it. But then there are people that have never known anything different. And unless we create an atmosphere by which they can experience something different, it might be very difficult. So peer support might be a good arena for that kind of a situation, where they could be around some other individuals with similar or other disabilities. And sometimes when it's getting challenged by somebody with a disability to a person with a disability versus somebody who does not have one, that's received very differently. Somebody with a disability saying to another, why aren't you working? Is going to be received very differently than if I, as an able person, temporarily able-bodied person, were to say that same thing to him. So those are kinds of things I would think about, I guess, in that kind of situation. Well, we're going to watch the potato video. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but as I said, it's only 3 minutes, and then we're really close to wrapping up, and we'll go from there. And you can take that out.
We're going to try.
Ooh.
Yeah, no, that's cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right.
Can anybody read that?
What's wrong with it?
He just does that.
Just has separation anxiety.
I didn't notice anything wrong.
You say either, and I say either. You say neither, and I say neither.
We don't have a picture here in Rapid City.
Neither. Let's call the whole thing off.
I'm sorry, Rapid City, you're not getting picture?
No picture in Rapid City.
Oh, we have it.
Oh, there we go. Now we do.
Other sites working?
Mine's working.
Yep.
Okay. I'm gonna hit play again.
Banging your head against a wall?
I take some aspirin.
I get a behavior program.
Is your paycheck burning a hole in your pocket?
I go to the mall and buy a new outfit.
My residential provider lets me buy a Coke.
A man of few words?
People call me pensive and quiet.
I'm labeled withdrawn and nonverbal.
A little off-centered?
I'm highly creative.
I'm perceived as strange.
Give the shirt off your back?
I'm generous.
I'm an easy mark.
Going against the grain?
I'm assertive.
I'm non-compliant.
Bite off more than you can chew?
I'm highly motivated.
I'm unrealistic.
Bored to tears?
I have the opportunity to move on to something else.
I'm whiny and unappreciative.
Feel like jumping out of your skin?
I go to a friend's house and visit.
I spend the day in van therapy.
Chalk it up to experience?
I learn from my experience.
I need more habilitation.
Speak your mind?
I make decisions for myself.
My team makes decisions for me.
Cross that bridge when you come to it?
I change my mind 5 times a day.
My team only meets once a year to make changes for me.
Get hot under the collar?
I go for a jog.
I get physically restrained.
Can't see the forest for the trees?
I'm a little confused.
I'm mentally retarded.
Have second thoughts?
I try something different.
I get an interdisciplinary team meeting.
All thumbs?
I'm a little clumsy.
I have poor motor skills.
things up in the air?
I'm keeping my options open.
I didn't finish.
Let the cat out of the bag?
I gossip.
I get social skills training.
Have 3 strikes against you?
I get a warning.
I go back to the sheltered workshop.
So how do you work with people with disabilities?
I don't know anything about that.
Just listen.
So if I go for scallops and you go for lobster, so all right, no contest, we'll order.
Any thoughts? It's a little dated, but it's still, and you might think it's specific to a certain population, but I think if we're honest, it has potential of being a part of our interactions with any group, especially when we're a provider of services to them. But any comments or thoughts, reactions?
Shelley, hi, this is Dawn Backer. I like that. I don't think that it was so dated just because of the words, but I don't know. I think it says a lot just by having words on the screen. So that was a good one.
And again, this is something we can make available if you want to do some training with somebody, or just kind of plant some seeds with some folks in terms of how we think about people with disabilities. It's another resource, of which we have many. So wanted to show you a couple of those during today, so you know some of what we have available that you can borrow anytime. With that, I'm pretty much ready to wrap up. What we have done is put together an envelope with some information that we're going to ask Eric and others to send out to you. In it, we have some disability etiquette brochures. We have some People First Language brochures. We have some coalition newsletters, and then we also have, if you've not already gotten one, because of what you do, the Freedom of Work Project put out the South Dakota Employment Resources for People with Disabilities little guide, and if you're new and haven't gotten that yet, we wanted to be sure that you had that as well at your desk. It's not be all, but it's definitely a starting point in terms of different resources that people with disabilities might need for different situations when it comes to employment. So we wanted to just provide you with a few things like that. There's some disability etiquette cards too. We're also providing to the state office here, so they'll have some as well. But want to thank you, and again, if there's no questions or comments, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here and for your attention on a nice Tuesday afternoon when you'd rather be out on the river fishing or in the park walking or whatever it might be. And hope to see you around sometime.
Any other questions from the audience?
Thank you.
Thanks very much for your time, Shelley.
Thanks, Shelley.
Appreciate it. Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you, everyone.
Girl,
We'll sign off. Have a good day.
Bye.